start with. I'm Phoebe Toups Dugas. I will also accept Dragon Goddess of Death for the day. This isn't a happy talk. It's the one that's made me the most sad. I mean, death was literally in the title, so, we started there. But we will address identity and gender harms to people, including dying, even in the real world. And you may find that it uncomfortably impacts upon the work that you do. And if so, I hope it helps. As salve, I do work on Agender Euphoria. Much of that came after this work, because this was started back in 2022. It was in review for a while. So I chose one of the games from our Agender Euphoria work, Entry and Odyssey. It's got some nice inclusion, including, for whatever reason, trans princess showed up at some point in one of the versions, so here she is. So I will try to keep up hope. I hope you do as well. Before we begin, I and my team collectively acknowledge the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, and the Chao, Bunagungumung, and Hassanavisco Nipmuc tribe. They are the world's first scholars. First Nations people have long been subject to necropolitical violence and approaches to their destruction. So while I am here in solidarity, I cannot speak to the pain of marginalized people who are not myself. So, speaking of marginalized people like myself, our genocide continues worldwide. These are news headlines from just a couple of days ago. Just a nice lineup when I searched for transgender. And the pervasive information technologies are helping. So this is the 3 steps to trans death. Trans cyber necropolitics. I'm Phoebe Toups Dugas, she and her, from Monash University in the Exertion Games Lab. All of my work is entirely human-made. There's no generative AI involved. This is a Transactions on Chi paper. The full title is slightly longer. Shanna Liang, who's a student at Worcester, is really the lead, but there's no way for her to come because she would have to leave the United States. Michelle B. Formier is my student at Monash, and Rose Border has also managed to leave the United States. So briefly, today we'll hit Trans 101, we'll talk about necropolitics, we'll talk about war machines and how generative AI is basically the latest one, and then we'll try to find hope, though I can't promise you much. So quick background, sex. It's a binary label of boy or girl based on visual assessment of what's between your legs, or some method of classifying people based on patterns of hormones and sexual characteristics, of chromosomes, or just some spectrum of physical features. It's actually a big mess. It's very complicated. There's a lot of gradation. This comes from a recent research paper. Maybe someone should tell the IOC. Anyway, this is the basis of how we generally assign gender in this world. So what is gender? I heard you ask. We're going to cover it so you don't have to in your turn. So it's your internal sense of self, expressed through your body, your culture, how you are socially perceived, your personal values. It probably, or may not, relate to your sex. As in my case, as a transgender woman, transgender is an umbrella term that we use to describe basically anyone whose gender does not align with what they were given at birth based on looking at them. I do want to note that while we use this umbrella term, it does not necessarily apply to everybody. Not everyone wants to claim that label. Okay, so that was the fun part, the happy part. You probably gathered from the necro and necropolitics, it had to do with death. It is Achille Mbembe's theory on how societies and civilizations essentially decide what kinds of people are important enough to be allowed to live and who is left to perish. Necropolitical systems put populations into classes. Those who are normal are allowed to live their lives. Those who are not get excluded. And one might reflect on history and recognize how this has been applied to gender, religion, sexuality, culture, country of origin, skin color, etc., etc., etc. Exclusion leads to death. So it was trans cyber necropolitics. We used ye old cyberspace as our term for digital information systems, the internet, applications, social media, games, all of those electronic things that mediate all aspects of our lives, the things that we are all here at CHI, to talk about. Control over who has access to these things, how they have access to them, how they may represent themselves is necropolitical. So I said earlier, exclusion leads to death. And this might absolutely, literally be the case. But there is also the notion of living death, continuing to survive biologically as an organism, yet unable to express yourself, or be perceived, or connect with others. Trans folks have a history in recent years of being overly represented in cyberspace as people who are basically already living dead in the real world. We had a brief moment in the sun, and now it seems to be taken away again. Cyberspace matters. It's how we connect with each other. It's where we get information. It's where we play, where we find friends. A place to be yourself, some way or another. So trans cyber necropolitics are systems that deem the lives of trans people to be disposable, render us into the living cyber dead, and take away our access to cyberspace. Now, I of course think we could think about how to apply this to all number of people, but again, all of our author team is trans, and we were thinking. So, trans cyber necropolitics, I promised you another term that also sounds horrifying and scary: war machines. War machines are how societies or governments or groups of people make necropolitics happen. They are the ways that all of those bad things come about. The war machine senses, it makes people visible, it separates out classes, it silences those who are not normal, in quotes. Then targets, making those people disposable, rendering them as other so that the normal folks don't have to worry about it. It's all fine. You don't need to see us as we die. So, these are our 3 steps to trans death. As trans people, our bodies often necessarily somehow participate in and otherwise pervade our experiences of cyberspace. Our voices may not match what our perceived genders are. We're required to provide ID supplied by a government. The government is the one that gets to decide how we appear. In targeting, trans people are misrepresented, made to be aberrant, made to be misunderstood, and thus lose access to cyberspace. So a few examples of war machines. Our paper talked about games and their communities. We thought on voice chat and the ways that games misrepresent trans people and the harms that have come out of that. More recently, we've seen a spate of online censorship where queer media is flagged as being adult and thus should no longer be readily available, and governments step in to require some sort of ID to ensure access. And since we're here at CHI, I thought I would talk about generative artificial intelligence systems. Quotes. I'm sorry, Morgan, I read your paper. Well, I read half of your paper. I was so depressed by the data in your paper that I did have to put it down. So, this is where we will share my opinions. Right? So again, right, this paper was really fully written by 2023. It spent a long time in review. It showed up in early access at some point, and it was finally published in October 2025, technically after the cutoff for this conference, but I begged our journals chairs to please not ask me to present trans cyber necropolitics in the United States in 2027, where I would most likely be detained at the border and thrown into a prison camp. So, how do generative AI systems harm trans people? How do they enact trans cyber necropolitics? They enforce this binary classification. They're unable to identify anything other than man or woman, boy or girl. None of these types of things work. And they also expose people's personal data, things like one's dead name from before their gender transition. For example, all of my papers that were in that massive data set that were used to train generative AI were my own papers with my own name on them. Supply misinformation, harden quote-unquote political beliefs, misrepresentations like being pedophiles or overly obsessed with sex or whatever. And then erase our identities. There's no need for us to exist. There are only cis men and women. So, how do we get out? I wish I had more answers for you on this. When we thought about games, we thought about how people might anonymize themselves and protect themselves online, how they might misdirect purposefully or create ways of connecting in groups, essentially forming assemblies. They might protect their autonomy. But all these things have grown harder and harder since we wrote this paper. It's worth noting that sometimes those in power may believe the term was turn traitor against the necropolitical system and seek to help us. And the rest of us have to work bottom up. So, 12 minutes exactly. Thank you for attending the 3 Steps to Trans Death, Trans Cyber Necropolitics.